Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of TV and Us, a conversation show about the TV series we just can't stop talking about. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And each season we focus on a different show, reviewing it episode by episode, and we invite you to watch along with us. Right now, we're reviewing The Last of Us Season 1, and today we're on the penultimate episode, episode 8, titled When We Are in Need. If you haven't watched it yet, this is your spoiler alert. Please check it out before continuing to listen to the rest of today's episode. Okay, Sarah, start us off with a summary for episode 8.
Ellie crosses paths with a vengeful group of survivors and draws the attention of its leader. A weakened Joel faces a new threat.
All right. The plot thickens. It really thickens, though, honestly, in this episode. Let's start off with our episode titles for episode 8. What is yours?
New Beginning.
Oh, yes, I like that. I like that. Honestly, I need the hopefulness of that. My God. My episode title is Happens for a Reason.
Yep.
Oh.
And we see that phrase employed in a certain way in this episode.
Yeah. Oh, my.
Yikes.
Yeah. Okay, well, this will be an interesting discussion. Let's dive right in and share our thoughts about episode 8 of The Last of Us. Sarah, tell me your thoughts about today's episode.
I don't know about you, Jen, but I personally did not have a cult and cannibals on my bingo card for The Last of Us.
Nope. I didn't have that at all. Nowhere on my radar. So you and I were smacked in the face by episode 8.
My gosh, it was I went on a whole weird roller coaster in this episode. The first thing that I have written down on my notes is it's a cult. And I was like, oh no, here we go. We're getting into some culty foolishness here. And then a little while into the episode, I was like, wait a second. Are they eating people? And then there's that like look exchanged by one of the dudes when he's handing off the meat. And I went,
Yeah.
No.
When he's like,
They're
venison.
People.
What is it today? Says the lady. Ask the lady, as you're, you
Right.
you do. He goes, venison. Ooh, chills up my spine.
And you're like, oh my God, that's not venison.
Oh,
Oh no.
it's so bad.
What have we gotten into?
Well, and then there's this like close-up shot of her shoveling the meat into the stew, and it lingers there, and you hear the sound effects, and you get to see it, and you're like, oh nope. We do not. Why would we be lingering on the shot of them making stew for so long? This is not good. Not good at all.
Yeah. So, I don't know, man. Cannibals have entered the chat, which we did not ask for. So that was fun. We also get just so much time with this cult leader who is a complete creep. Like,
So bad.
oh my gosh, he is awful. So there's just a lot in this. Like, for grittiest moment, when we give out our awards later, I have so many options. I don't even know what to choose. I still haven't picked one because there's too many to choose from in this episode.
Yeah.
Because it's all
bad.
uncomfortable and cringy and awful.
Yep.
And I was unprepared.
I was
for
unprepared as well.
Cannibals. Yeah. Those are kind of my initial thoughts of like, wow, The Last of Us went there. We went to cannibalism.
Mhm.
Cool.
Well, and that was my overarching feeling after watching this episode is I just didn't think the show was going to go there. Not just like conceptually going there with like cults and cannibals, but also the last 5 to 7 minutes of this episode are really dark and really hard to watch. And I didn't think that the show was going to go there. So the episode ended and I really just sat in silence and needed to collect my thoughts and get my bearings because the emotions and weightiness of watching this episode, I was not prepared for, you know? It was all, you know, survival, some fun banter between our two protagonists. They're going on a big journey. It's this grand adventure. We're going off to save the world. But this girl that is immune, like this episode descends into a different headspace and a much different register than I thought that it was going to go. So I was unprepared for that. But I do think that it's fascinating that this comes so late, because we kind of thought we knew what the show was and where they were willing to play. And the show's like, but you haven't seen all we can do and are willing to do. But then two, the fact that we don't get any infected beings in this episode at all. And it really, thesis of the show is like, we've seen some of the best of humanity, and we are also unafraid to show you some of the darkest and worst parts of humanity as well. And we're kind of fearless and bold enough to go there. So I feel like I'm getting to know and unpacking the layers of what the show really is about and what their overarching thesis is, and kind of their fearlessness to do that. And that's impressive to me.
Yeah, there's a recurring theme that we've seen through a few different episodes and a few different characters, and it pops up again in this one, is this idea of who people become after the end of the world. And we've seen that a little bit with Joel, even, you know, as he is this like protector dude. And then we saw it with Bill and Frank, and how they found love and created a life together after that. And even with Kathleen, you know, she became somebody totally different, and she became this leader after the apocalypse. And then we see it in this episode with the cult leader as well. And there was a opportunity and a power vacuum, and he took it and he became this other thing. And so I think that that's a really interesting theme that's kind of woven throughout all of these episodes is, and we saw it with Ellie too in that flashback. She was totally different before she was infected as opposed to now. And this idea of reinvention and like who we are becoming and how we handle difficult situations, or how, you know, extreme circumstances can give us an opportunity to become someone new or do something new. And I think that that's a really interesting thing that we've seen in this. Of course, there's a lot of like death and destruction and stuff happening in here, and some people don't always choose a healthy or a good way to reinvent themselves after the apocalypse. But there is that theme of, okay, the world has ended, or at least the world as we knew it has ended. Who will I become now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what I really appreciate about the show is that it's showcasing to us the ways that we justify our actions too, and kind of playing and willing to showcase the moral gray area. Because going from episode 7 to episode 8, The Last of Us does a little bit of what Ridley Scott's The Last Duel does, which is, in the previous episode, we were focused on Joel and Ellie, and we are invested in them. And so when we see these 4 raiders on the campus that they're going to find the Fireflies, and Joel takes one of them out as a result of self-defense, like we don't think too much about it, you know. But that concept of, you know, everybody is someone's father, mother, son, daughter, I feel like was kind of portrayed as we start off episode 8, where we get to see like that guy was somebody's dad, and they were just looking for food. And there's all of that could not be communicated in that fast interaction between Joel and him, but it kind of flips the script on who we're invested in. And I think the show is increasing in the intensity of Joel's actions, and we are invested because we're aligned and loyal to him and Ellie. So when he's taking people out to like find where Ellie is and get information out of those guys, we're like, yeah, because we care about you and we care about Ellie. But the intensities of his actions are quite extreme for his goal. And we just, as the viewers, are aligned to his goal. But when you zoom out a little bit, like every person is protecting and caring for someone or something. So we talked a lot about this with Kathleen. Like her actions of vengeance are out of her desire to seek justice for her brother. And so like we could argue with David, like his desire is to protect his flock. Moral high ground is he's very much has conceded at this point with a lot of what he does. But I love that the show doesn't showcase just like evil human beings and the good guys and maybe the evil infected beings. You know, it's not that cut and dry. Everybody's protecting and caring for someone, and all of their methodologies and actions can be argued from any side on whether it's justified or not. And I love that the show plays in some of those moral gray areas, and like our main characters aren't perfect either and cannot hold the moral high ground. And the show continues to reference back to so much of the things that Joel and Tommy and whatnot have done in their past to survive and to protect their flock.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, humanity is complex, and we are all complex as human beings, and nobody is I think full perfect, and like nobody is like full evil. It's always like a spectrum, and we live in that kind of like gray area. And this show demonstrates that so well, because everybody has done things in order to survive or to, like you said, protect those that they care about that are wrong or evil or bad. And they had some sort of justification for it. They had some sort of reason for it, which we all do on a smaller scale. You know, thankfully we're not living in the apocalypse and we don't have to make these kind of decisions, but it's so easy to justify things. That's such a human trait, and we see that in all of these characters. And we also see this instinctive move to survive. You know, you will do what you have to do. Joel is lying there. He can't keep his eyes open. He is infected with all kinds of stuff. He's sewn up by needle and thread. Like, the dude is out for the count. And yet there is that instinctive part of him that is like, okay, we just have to survive. We got to do what we got to do. I don't know how he did all of that, because I'm like, buddy, how are you thinking, let alone taking out these three dudes? But I think it's just that like instinctive, like, I have to survive. Mm-hmm. I have to protect. Mm-hmm. And that's it. We'll deal with the consequences later.
Yeah.
And that's what we see from him and Ellie in this episode.
Yeah. I simultaneously love that like heroic transformation and healing that happens so quickly for him somehow, or he's mustered up so much strength. I would have liked to see a little bit more of his struggling. Like, I think that would have added so much, one, realism, but two, stakes to so much of his will to protect and look for Ellie. So, you know, at the beginning, we see that he really is struggling. And by the time he's like taking the other two dudes out, I'm like, you're looking a little too strong right now. I wanted a little bit more of that, like heavy heaving, you know, like grasping for the side of the wall, but then mustering up the strength again, because I think that would have added so much depth and weight to his desire to protect Ellie and to survive, and kind of tapping into these unknown reserves of strengths that are honestly physically impossible, and yet the human will is incredibly powerful and resilient. So he has a full transformation in this episode, which I would have liked some more struggling. We need some more John Wicking here, you know, some sweating, some bruises, some real struggling, and I think that would have added a little bit more. So I would have liked to increase the volume of the struggle a little bit.
Maybe he has a weird superpower that the more people you take out, then the stronger you get.
I love that. You like absorb, all of their human life.
Yeah, they're like life force or something.
Yeah. Sounds good.
Maybe that's his superpower. Yep. All right. Excellent.
I like it.
We got it.
Come in handy, you know? You're right, though.
Yeah.
He becomes increasingly more strong with every dude that he's taking out, which theoretically, you've used all of your strengths. You should be exhausted after killing the first dude.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, 100%. Bro wasn't able to keep his eyes open. Like, Ellie's talking to him, and his eyes are like 1/3 open.
Yep.
Are you kidding me? And then he just takes out all these dudes? I don't buy it. Joel is great, but like, come on now.
Mm-hmm.
A little realism, please.
Okay, other big things in this episode. What are your thoughts? Maybe let's talk about David. What are your thoughts about David? There's a whole journey we go on with David.
Oh my gosh, he's such a creep. He's awful. And I love the way that Ellie interacts with him, because she's like, this is not a safe person. And I am not going to trust you at all. And then obviously, like, he gives her good reason, because he's basically like one step removed from a child bride conversation that's happening when she's in that cell. Like, this is so not okay.
No.
And I love, he says that line to her, you see a lot, and so do I. And it's fascinating that they both have this observational thing, which cult leaders usually do, because they can read people and then like figure out how to manipulate them. And we've seen over the course of the show that Ellie is very observant, and she picks up on things, but she doesn't always let you know that she knows something. And I loved watching Ellie's thought process in this. You can see kind of her wheels turning as she's trying to problem solve, or as she's reading him and kind of plotting her next move. So I really appreciated what we got to see out of her in that relation, or in that conversation with David that we see. And then she totally breaks his hand, and then burns down his lodge thing, and then kind of goes ham on him. So that was very over the top, but also very satisfying, and makes sense for Ellie too, because we even saw in the previous episode when she was dealing with her big feelings after getting bit, that she just goes and she smashes up that whole store, and she just like sees red and just has to let that emotion out somehow. And we see that again in this episode too. So we're learning a little bit more about this protagonist that we've come to really we've grown affection toward and are rooting for, and we got to see some different sides of her in this, which I appreciated.
Oh, that we did. Yeah. I was flashing back to how at our looking ahead section from our previous episode, I was like, oh my gosh, well, like Ellie's on her own now, and Joel's out, he's out cold. So we're going to get to see her will to survive and her apply all of the things that she's learned. And I'm like, oh my gosh, can I take that back now? I did not want this for you, Ellie. I'm so sorry. Because you have gone through so much. And we do. I mean, we have known that she is so clever, so observant, and she's able to finesse out of so many tough situations. And we get to see so much of that in her in this episode. She's incredibly sharp and intelligent, and it's incredible to see how she navigates what feels like a truly impossible situation. And yet also there's so much that we've seen Joel want to protect her in, not having to see, not having to experience, not having to have so much of that childhood innocence taken away. And this episode feels like the point of no return for Ellie as well. Like she has seen so much of what humanity is capable of, and also has experienced so much trauma in this episode that I'm like, oh my gosh, this feels like a huge character shift and moment that I feel like will probably be continually cut back to, and she's going to have to process over the next episode and then the next entire season of all that she's experienced in this. So it's tough, because I feel like we see so much of her resilience and that survival instinct and her cleverness in this episode, but I also like more in the loss of so much of what Joel was also trying to protect her from, that she is now like just having to had been fully immersed into in this episode as well. So there's so much, like, I think bittersweetness in like this episode for this character that I think will be fascinating to see where the show chooses to take her next as she navigates like where to go from here, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to be protected from a cannibal cult leader.
Yep.
Yeah, that's gonna mess you up.
It's going to, yeah.
But it is, yeah. it is interesting that this comes just a few episodes after. So it was episode 4 that they go into Kansas City and Ellie shoots the dude and paralyzes him.
Yeah.
And then Joel has her go behind the wall and Joel kills him. And then in this episode, we see Ellie having to actually take this dude out.
Yeah.
Just to protect herself and get away. And the journey that she has been on over those 4 episodes is a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, this poor girl. She has been through hell.
Yeah.
I feel so bad for her.
It's just so bad. This episode is so, like, watching it as a viewer stuff and then just imagining what this character is going to have to process and the aftermath. Like, where are we going to pick up for the next episode, for the season finale? Like, are we cutting ahead, you know, and or are we picking up right where we left off? No idea. But it was notable that after the episode with Henry and Sam, the episode ends with our 2 characters like feeling the absolute weight of everything that they've experienced, losing these 2 new friends. But we start the next episode 3 months ahead, which I thought was a really smart choice because there's just so much time probably needed to like sit with these characters through all that they've experienced. So it's able to move the plot forward and kind of jump to the next section of their journey. So I am curious to see where we pick up on as we start episode 9 for this finale.
Yeah, I kind of hope that we don't jump forward in time. I don't know. I feel like that's maybe the easier way to go.
Yep.
I don't know. I hope that we stay in this timeline and just see the like immediate continuation, because there's so much that's like working against them right now. They're in an unfamiliar area. They're far away from Tommy. They don't know where the Fireflies are. They don't even have a horse anymore to get them anywhere. Joel is still hurt, and Ellie is carrying all of this trauma and probably some physical injuries too. Like, that's a lot of things working against them, and I think that those constraints might be interesting to come into our next episode with. I think jumping ahead in time could maybe rob us of some maybe interesting character work that could be done with all of those constraints. But I don't know. I could be wrong.
No, I think that it's right for the show to stay in this moment because, you know, the placement of the Henry and Sam piece and whatnot is we were on this momentum of the journey and things like that. But this episode 8 moment feels so big and so character shifting for both of these 2. The emotional connection that is able to be built between the 2 of them as they have to process through this together, but then also for Ellie to have experienced so much and for them to like kind of like cut away from that, I think would be a cheaper move or a little bit of a like this feels fundamental to so much of how this character's next kind of trajectory will be. Like, it's kind of a fork in the road moment. Like, will she be able to, maybe with the help of Joel, process this well and use it as a way to fuel her and her desire to protect and not draw the wrong conclusions? Or does this like push her on a path that maybe she's lost for a while and takes a really left turn in this moment? Because I feel like so many of those big emotional like character shifting moments, even that we experience in our lives, like there's so many conclusions that are made from them, and when the wrong ones are made, it kind of takes us on this long detour and we have to do a lot of healing to get to back to like center for us. Or with the right people around us, like we can really process that fully and well and use that as part of our story, part of our resilience, you know? And I think this feels like one of those fork in the road moments, and how she codes the situation and all that she's experienced will be pivotal to how she grows over the next weeks, months, years, you know, for who she is and how she's wired. So this feels too big to cut away from. So I am with you. I think that we have to sit in this moment. And I think it's the placement of it in the season kind of begs for it to be something that we have to sit in. We're not starting a new journey, a new season of like 3 months later, and now we've got a new leg of this journey. Like, no, we've got an episode left before we reach some resting point for season 1. So it feels right for something to happen in this moment for us to have processed through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Lean into that difficult character stuff. And I mean, the show has made it clear that nobody is safe, and we're not going to cut away from the difficult stuff. So there's plenty here for these two to, I don't know, get through. And I loved that moment at the end when Joel finds Ellie, and it again reminded me of that episode 4 moment after Joel kills that dude. There's just such tenderness in him and such safety in him. Yeah. And he doesn't have to say all the words, you know, like he's not that guy, but he just gives her a giant hug, puts his coat around her, like lets her know that she is safe just by his presence. And so it was just such a sweet, tender moment after she has been walking through hell for an entire episode. And then, okay, we're somewhat okay now. We're not doing great, but we're better than we were at the start of the episode. So at least there's that.
Yeah, that moment. I as a viewer needed that moment. Okay, you know what I mean? Let alone Ellie. Like I love that the show ends there, because I think emotionally, as the viewer, having gone through so much with Ellie over the course of this episode, I really needed it. You know, I needed the hug from Pedro Pascal with his big bare arms and his one sentence that you mentioned, you said, "It's okay, baby girl, I've got you." And that's all he needs to say. And he reads and knows that like she is in the state of trauma right now. So nothing else is going to go in right now. And I think it was also really like notable feeling that contrast in her isolation, her feeling alone, caged up, physically violated, and then to be embraced in that way by him physically, I think also meant a lot. That signaling of safety and protectiveness that he exhibited both in his actions, but then also in his words together, felt like exactly what she needed as well. After having been so alone and so isolated and having to fight for her life, she could just kind of like rest and sink into his arms. And I thought the show is emotionally so in tune enough to know what we needed. And I like that moment also doesn't last very long. Like we don't sit and languish in that. It gives us enough, and then the episode ends. So we're kind of still reeling from the freshness of everything that she's just experienced in the last 15 minutes. But there's a feeling of we're going to be okay, and doesn't sit too long in that as well. So, ma'am, I got to say that was the right amount for this episode to end with. Not too much, not too little, but it's really exactly what I needed.
Yeah. And it's also just so in line with the characters too. You know, neither of them are the most emotionally in tune, which makes sense because they've been through terrible things and they're surviving through the apocalypse. Yep. So there's not a lot of time for feelings, but when you need them, they're there in just the right amount.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's also really interesting to read about how that they actually changed the way that final few minutes happens compared to the original game. So apparently in the original game, Joel intervenes in the midst of when Ellie is taking out David and like prompts and guides her to say like, don't do it, like peels her off of him and kind of comes to the rescue in that way. And I actually love the way that the show plays out those last few minutes. She stops herself, stumbles out, happens to collide with him, which is great. Awesome. He's at the right place at the right time. But it's not like he comes in to save her, which I actually was thinking that the show was going to do that, because we're cutting back and forth between Ellie and her having to figure out how to survive in this lodge. And then Joel is like making progress towards finding her. So, the way that it would have been written is like he finds her, he takes David out and like wraps her up in his arms and carries her to safety. But I love that she stops herself. And so the way that he is able to provide for her in that moment is not to physically save her from danger, but to provide that safety and that embrace of that hug at the end. So he's emotionally saving her from the continued trauma of the moment instead of literally physically saving her from actual danger. She actually stops herself. She stumbles out and he swoops her up at just the right moment. I think that, at least emotionally, felt right to me. And I love the way that actually plays out better than him continuing to come to the rescue, because we've seen him play that role over the past 7 episodes where he has been the provider, he's been the guide, he's been the one that's been in that position of control and power to protect the two of them. And I kind of love that he doesn't show up in time in this moment. She saves herself and he comes to provide for her emotionally.
And there's an interesting kind of parallel between that scene and the first episode. I think it was the first episode. I don't remember. They all blur together. But where Joel is just wailing on that QZ officer guy. And you would expect Tess to come in and intervene, and she doesn't. She just keeps on going with Ellie, knowing that when he's done, he will come and join them. And obviously, it's a very different situation because Joel is trying to get to Ellie in this episode. But I think that might also be one of those similarities. And the show has kind of been seeding those throughout. We saw in the 5th episode when Ellie is a superhero and does everything she can to save Henry and Sam, and then experiences that heartbreak when she isn't able to. And that's reminiscent of Joel in the first episode when he was trying to save his daughter and couldn't. And so there's just these little things where they're having really parallel experiences. And I mean, obviously they've spent so much time together, so they've built this bond. But I think these parallel moments are also these seeds of empathy that are going to continue to grow. And like, Joel has been there before. He knows what that feels like. Maybe not all the details, but he's gone through something similar. So he is a good person to be a guide. He'll mess it up and he'll say the wrong things and probably do the wrong things, but he has such care for her and has been through so many similar things that he can probably help her choose a different path than he has chosen if she wants to. And I just find those parallels between these two characters really interesting that the show keeps kind of highlighting throughout all these episodes.
Yeah, that's so good. It's so funny too, because David is trying to draw parallels and showcase the similarities between him and Ellie, but ultimately we see that there's also so much really in the way that Ellie's wired that is most similar to Joel and their instincts, to provide. And so David's almost trying to draw out the worst sides of Ellie and say, like, look how much we're the same. And when we as the viewers also get to see really these golden moments between Ellie and Joel that are so similarly wired that they too, both of them have like maybe no idea about, or maybe starting to uncover the similarities. But this guy, kind of this like toxic way that David's looking to relate to her and build connections versus this really true and organic and pure way that these two between Joel and Ellie are naturally connecting and providing that feeling of camaraderie together that almost doesn't even need to be spoken, doesn't need to be convinced or articulated for the other party. It's there and it's unspoken. And that is fascinating, the way that both are looking to build connection, but in very different ways.
Yeah, and you even we've talked about this where Ellie's desire is to not end up alone, and David is offering that in a very gross, inappropriate, twisted, evil way. But after the was it the previous episode? I don't know, man. They all are blurring together. 2 episodes ago, when they were at the commune and Ellie has that thought of like, oh no, do I end up alone? Is Joel going to go with his brother instead of me? Will I be abandoned again? And here's an opportunity for her to have a giant family and belong and be part of this group. And she is wise enough to know, like, no, this is not it. You are not my people. You are not a safe person. Let me take the risk and continue on with Joel, because he is safe and he is trustworthy. And she's opening herself up to maybe getting hurt again, you know, if Joel decides to leave and go back with Tommy or go off on his own or whatever. And so I think that look at that core motivation of Ellie's to not end up alone, it resurfaces here in an interesting way. And I don't know, she chooses Joel again. So we're going to see, hopefully that, you know, works out.
And she makes the right choice, because this is really...
She sure does.
It's interesting to see this theme of like fatherhood that's kind of being showcased in this episode and unpacked. Obviously, both we see that like father protective spirit in Joel, and we also see David tapping into that same narrative, but in a really twisted way. And I think one of the little details that I really loved in this episode is seeing the plate of the giant heaping of that tomato stew that David has on his plate, but then seeing everyone else in the congregation with just like a small mound, and they're just grasping for every bite, but he has the largest portion that he's given himself. And so that's such a contrast to the way that we've seen Joel exhibit that father spirit of protecting out of self-sacrifice. So, you know, he gives, when they meet Henry and Sam, and he doesn't know Henry and Sam at this moment, but he gives Sam his piece of that bread or cracker or whatever it was that's wrapped in the paper, but he gives his portion over to Sam out of a way to provide, versus we see David taking that role of father, but it's about power and it's about selfishness, and he's willing to take versus to give and to provide sacrificially. And so those little practical ways that we see the way that they lead and the way that they protect their flock, quote unquote, looking so different from each other is really neat to see. So it's a physical expression of the underlying spirit of how they show up and kind of their ultimate motivations of what it means to see themselves as that father, protector, provider of the people in their care, and the vast ocean of difference between their approaches is really neat to see expressed in these like very physical ways with just like food and rationing food.
Well, and that's also really interesting because I think it's at the beginning of this episode before Ellie goes out to try and find food, help, supplies, something. She takes a couple of bites of food and there's one bite left, and she looks at it and she almost eats it, but then she leaves it for Joel. And so we see just how hungry she is, and like they are obviously, Joel is hurt. This is very, very bad on that front as well, but they would appear to be maybe out of food as well. And so that, like, even her like rejecting the food that David brings her in the cell, like having the
that's so good.
I don't know, the
restraint.
The strength.
Yeah,
to be like, no, I'm not accepting this from you when you have food right there and you are starving. Like, she still says no and rejects that because she knows that this isn't safe, and she knows that there's something better out there, and is probably willing to starve rather than be roped into whatever David is selling. And so I think that that's another interesting little theme throughout this episode of how, again, that instinct, how far will you go to survive? And we need to eat to survive. But she was willing to reject that instinct and not take his meal from him.
That's a great observation. Yeah, that's awesome. That adds so much more weight to her action of rejecting the food. I didn't even think about putting that two and two together of how hungry she must have been if they've been out of food for days at this point. And it is interesting to see the way that when the physical demands of our human bodies come into play, like it really can maybe allure us into compromising that sense of morality. And we see the way that this entire congregation, I guess a lot of them don't know. So the people in power of this congregation have chosen to make that trade-off and that compromise of ideology and principle. They'd rather survive and eat other humans than choose to die, but still hold the dignity and the principle and the morality of what they believe is right. And so the way that, you hear David kind of talk about that, and he like justifies it away of like, well, this is my responsibility to care for these people. So like, yes, we compromise, but it's out of desire to protect. So therefore it is good, right? And you're like, well, oh no, I think you should rather die before giving into cannibalism. I think that would be the right assessment of the moral justification for this. But they have employed twisted logic to justify it to themselves. And that like intoxication of the physical needs when they become so strong, and Ellie's willingness to reject that and choose to hold to her principle of like, I will not give in to these people that are not safe, that I do not trust, that are dangerous, and I will not take anything from them at the denial of my own physical needs is admirable. And we see the contrast to the people that are stewarding this congregation, the way that they have not made that trade-off and have chosen to give in. Gosh.
Yeah. I think that there are a lot of other options before we get to cannibalism. Like every other option
pretty much
is available.
Yeah.
Before that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, man. You got to be really desperate. And
even then.
The Society of the Snow is a Netflix documentary, and it gets into that, and it handles it very, very well. And that's a different conversation than this. So I would just like to say to this cult congregation business, guys, let's reassess.
Oh, yeah.
Let's make some different choices, shall we?
Yep.
There are other options available to you. Have you heard of vegetarianism, perhaps? I don't know, just as a start.
Yeah.
I'm just spitballing here.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can do other things. You don't have to eat people.
Mm-hmm. Good words of advice. PSA to us all. Okay. Mm-hmm. Should we give out some TV and us awards?
Let's do it.
Okay. The first category is Scrappiest Survivor. What is your choice for this award?
I want to give it to our favorite superhero, Joel, for being stabbed and still taken out. Not one, but 3 dudes.
Yep. I'm in line with that. I said Joel for his miraculous and timely healing.
You just need 2 shots of penicillin and you're good to go. Like,
apparently.
Stab wound, never heard of her.
Mm-hmm. The next category is for grittiest moment. What is your choice?
Oh gosh, Jen, I don't know. Okay, let me choose one.
Entire episode, perhaps.
The entire episode. Okay, here's a scene that I don't think we've talked about, so I'm going to choose it so we can talk about it. There's a moment. Oh, it's when they're eating or when they're just about to eat, and the cult, like Hannah says something, and David gets upset, so he backhands her.
Yeah.
And then he extends his hand to her to help her up. The anger in my person in that scene was overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
So I would like to select that as my moment because it's infuriating and creepy and awful.
Yep. Well, and then after that, he says something along the lines of like, your father will be respected, essentially insinuating that he is now her new father after she's just lost her father. Like, what? This is
gross.
This is real bad.
Yeah. Yep. Not okay.
My choice for this category is like the 5 to 7 minutes at the end of this episode. I found that really hard to watch, and I needed a moment. I needed a hug from Pedro Pascal in the snow afterwards. So that's my choice.
Yeah, that's a good choice. It's
an on-screen hug has never hit so good ever. I'm not gonna lie.
It's true.
Yeah.
You feel the sigh of relief when they're embracing.
Oh, yeah, it's so good. All right, next category is Straight Shooter Award. What is your choice for this one?
I'm gonna give it to James, who says about Ellie, she's just another mouth to feed.
That's good.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Honestly, yeah. I mean, they have limited resources, and taking another person in, like, James is really just trying to understand David's twisted logic. He's really out of the loop.
Yeah.
He doesn't get it.
He's doing his best. But unfortunately, David is a cult leader. Yeah. So that never ends well.
No, not good. I'm giving this award to David, to Ellie, when Ellie is in the cage, when he goes, I've always had a violent heart. And we just apparently couldn't communicate clearly about ourselves. So that's really good. That's helpful. At least, you know. Self-awareness, the least, you know? He's one redeeming trait.
Yeah.
My God.
That's so good.
He is not fooling himself. So I guess good.
He is not.
He's just fine with
just everyone else.
Yeah, he's just fine with it. Very honest with himself, very fine with it. All right.
Yeah, not the lesson we wanted you to learn, David.
No, we'd rather you maybe be deluded, maybe a little bit better. Looking ahead, we've got the finale of the season on dock next up. What are you hoping to see?
Here's my question. Do fireflies exist? And will we see them again? Because if they exist and we're going to see them, we better see them in this next episode.
Yeah.
I
don't know.
This whole thing was orchestrated by Marlene. Is Marlene going to pop up in this next episode? Did she somehow make the trek from Boston too?
Is she still alive?
What are we doing?
You know, because everybody dies, apparently.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And so there's been talk of other Firefly bases too. So when are we going to get some Firefly action? Because right now, I don't know who they are. I don't know what they're up to. I would like to know more information.
Yeah.
And then I know that this show is using the premise to then explore humanity, and I appreciate that. And it's leading to some really interesting thoughts and things. But I really would like to see some infected just going crazy in this last episode. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be to the same level as episode 5. That was so cool. But I would like to see some action. That would be nice. I want some zombies, and they're fast too, so it makes it exciting. That's what I want.
Yeah, I never thought I would say this, but I really miss the infected beings. We've gotten a lot of really messed up humans, and
yeah,
I don't know. The infected beings seem really pleasant at this point in time, compared to some cult leaders and cannibalists. Let's give me some clickers, give me some infected beings, give me some of those big dudes. Yeah, we miss our friends that are a lot. It's nature doing its thing, and I can stomach that a lot better than I can stomach some supposed venison. So we would like to see some of those. I really am just curious where we're going next in this finale. And there's so much that has happened in episode 8, and we're kind of our two protagonists are back together. We kind of have what feels like a blank slate to do something with over the course of an episode, and then reach a point in time where we have a little mini wrap up with a little mini bow before the next season begins. And I'm just really curious. There feels like we can go radially in any direction now for what's to come next. And that's really exciting to me. I think that's really smart to do, to leave our penultimate episode heading into the finale with not a clue of what's going to happen next. So I love tonally, plot wise, character moments wise, it feels like we're in the center of a roundabout and we could really go in any direction. And that's really thrilling to me. So I'm curious to see how they handle this finale episode. So I'm eager to see some of that. So yeah, some infected beings, some directional choices, and then I wonder if we're going to end on a cliffhanger of some kind, like some resolution at obviously the end of the finale, but will we end on a little denouement moment, and what will that be? That's going to be the thing that fuels all of the questions, all of the Reddit threads, all of the internet theories between seasons. So that's always like fun and fascinating for me to see with the show of what do they leave us with for us to discuss in depth before we head into the beginning of the next season. So I'm curious to see what that denouement moment might be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And like, what is the thesis of this show?
Yeah.
You know, like the show has seemed to have a lot to say about like nature, but then also humanity and how we interact with the world around us and like all of that. So is there going to be something in this final episode that kind of ties all of that together or unlocks maybe a different part of these themes that we've already been exploring? That'll also be kind of interesting to see.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. And structurally, it is fascinating to zoom out and think about episode 3 kind of being one of those moments that we really deep to begin this like rumination on all the different sides of humanity. And we started with one of the most meaningful and sweetest and most like optimistic view of humanity with episode 3, you know? And we've met so many people along the way, different societies, different people groups that have kind of, especially in the more recent episodes, been darker and darker. So do we continue to descend there with these two protagonists showcasing the best of humanity amidst all of that? Or do we end the finale episode of this season with something a little bit more hopeful, ultimately, you know? And so zooming out to see that larger structure, I think will be fun for us to talk about structurally in the next episode, in our next conversation.
Mm-hmm. So is there a light in the darkness?
Yeah, exactly.
Or is it just pure darkness?
Yeah, because we started out with some light, then we really went to some dark places, a few little lights along the way. But will we end in darkness with the hopefulness being in our two characters that we love so deeply? Or will it end overall, like tonally more hopeful? We'll see.
I don't know.
Maybe we end with like
we
walking into the Firefly camp and like they see each other and then cut and cuts to credits. And we start off the next season with like, oh my gosh, we found hope. We found the Fireflies, but we don't get to indulge in any of it yet. Like we just open up the door, we see each other. It's the Fireflies. Boom, ending credits roll.
Honestly, Jen, I think that that's too hopeful.
Yeah. It's The Last of Us.
My thought is that if Fireflies exist and they haven't all been murdered, that there's going to be something real shady with them, or like something like dark with them. Like they, you know, like we've achieved our goal.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be this victory. Because even, it was the previous episode. It was the flashback episode where Riley joined the Fireflies and Ellie was like, nope. I don't trust them. And Ellie had a good reason for her mistrust. And so my guess is that if we are going to find the Fireflies,
they're going to be extremists.
There's going to be a twinge of not goodness there. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
We can be hopeful. I'm sorry to like be a Debbie Downer at the end of this episode. We can hope for a little light for these characters.
Yeah.
But I am skeptical.
Well, it's the best kind of ending, honestly, is when, you know, perhaps, honestly, the Fireflies suck. We meet the Fireflies, they suck, but we've seen emotional connection and bonds formed between Joel and Ellie, and that's our win. That's our hope. That's our thing to put our stakes into of like, no, like real human love and care exists in the darkness. So like circumstantially, real bad. Our mission, terrible. We didn't really accomplish it or it sucks, but the characters have grown. They've built bonds that they didn't exist at all at the beginning of the season. So it's very much similar to, I think, in one of the seasons of The Bear, I forget which one, but the characters accomplished their goal. Like they opened the restaurant, successful friends and family night, but like Carmy descended into absolute chaos, you know? So it's kind of a mixed ending. So like in some dimensions, we had some great wins. Other dimensions, not so good, you know? I think that would be probably the most satisfying and the best fitting. And I think it's where the show will go. The show's not overly rosy. It gave us this deceiving episode 3 where it's like this beautiful love story. And then absolute chaos since.
Well, and like beautiful love story and everyone dies.
Right. Yeah.
You know, so it's like, we're going to give you this nice thing, but we're going to remind you that no one is safe in this show and everybody dies. So please plan accordingly. And so here we are planning accordingly and not trusting this show and not being like, we have a thimble full of hope.
Yeah.
And that's all that we can trust this show with.
Yep. That's true. It's true. And we will be here to find out. So we can't wait to talk about the finale very soon and see where this goes. But in the meantime, this was our review and discussion of episode 8. You can find it available to stream on Max. Thank you for listening to today's episode of TV and Us. Our name sums it up. We're big fans of TV and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. So everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today as we continued our journey through The Last of Us Season 1. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune to your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review letting us know your thoughts about episode 8. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at TVNSPod, or email us at tvnspod@gmail.com. We will be back very soon to discuss the finale of The Last of Us Season 1. We can't wait. We hope you have an awesome week, and we'll talk again with y'all very soon.